Dr. Hartwell, what did you just do? She's faking it. Get her out of my ER.
Dr. Kenneth Hartwell had just committed the biggest mistake of his life. The pregnant woman he'd slapped and thrown out of his emergency room wasn't just another patient. She was the daughter of the man who owned the hospital, and security footage had captured everything. His career was about to implode. The fluorescent lights of St. Augustine Medical Center's emergency room buzzed overhead as Camilla Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in the waiting room chair. It was 2 in the morning, and the cramping in her abdomen had gone from concerning to terrifying in the span of an hour. At 7 months pregnant, she knew what normal pregnancy discomfort felt like. This wasn't it. When she'd gone to the bathroom 20 minutes ago, there had been blood, not a little. Enough to soak through and make her hand shake as she pressed the call button at the reception desk for the 3rd time. The nurse barely looked up. A woman in a tennis bracelet and designer purse had just walked in complaining of a twisted ankle, and somehow she was called back immediately. Camilla watched her disappear through the double doors and felt something close to despair settle in her chest. She'd been waiting for 3 hours now, 3 hours of watching people who arrived after her get seen first. 3 hours of polite requests met with dismissive glances at her Medicaid card and tight-lipped smiles that didn't reach anyone's eyes. She was an elementary school teacher. She'd spent the last 5 years shaping young minds, staying late for parent conferences, buying supplies out of her own pocket because the school budget wouldn't cover it. She and her husband Dennis had been saving every penny for this baby, their first. They'd painted the nursery themselves, assembled the crib from a secondhand store, washed tiny clothes that friends had passed down. Camilla had never asked for anything she hadn't earned. But right now, hunched over in a waiting room chair while her baby's life might be in danger, she needed help. And no one seemed to care. When a nurse finally called her name, Camilla nearly cried with relief. The woman led her to an examination room without a word, handed her a gown, and left. Another 30 minutes passed. Camilla changed into the gown with shaking hands, the paper crinkling loudly in the silence. She could hear laughter from the nurse's station down the hall. Someone was talking about their weekend plans. Another voice complained about overtime, then quieter but still audible. These Medicaid patients always think they're dying. It's always something. The door finally opened. Dr. Kenneth Hartwell strode in like a man interrupted from something far more important. He was tall, graying at the temples in that distinguished way that looked deliberate, wearing scrubs that somehow looked expensive. He didn't introduce himself, didn't smile. He glanced at the chart in his hand with the expression of someone who had already decided this was a waste of his time. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, not looking at her. Camilla explained as calmly as she could manage. The cramping, the bleeding, the feeling that something was very, very wrong. She watched his face for any sign of concern, any indication that he was taking her seriously. Instead, she saw his jaw tighten with what looked like annoyance. "You're probably just having Braxton Hicks contractions," he said, making a note on his tablet. "It's normal. First-time mothers often panic over nothing." "But the bleeding," Camilla started. "Spotting can be normal, too." He still wasn't looking at her. "You need to stay calm. Stress isn't good for the baby." Camilla felt her throat tighten. She'd been calm. She'd been patient. She'd waited for hours while others were seen first, and now that she was finally in front of a doctor, he was dismissing her without even a basic examination. "Could you please do an ultrasound? Just to make sure the baby's okay?" Dr. Hartwell finally looked at her, and the expression on his face made her stomach drop. It was contempt, barely concealed. "Do you know how much an ultrasound costs? We can't just run expensive tests on everyone who comes in here worried about every little twinge. I went to Johns Hopkins. I think I know more about pregnancy than you do." The words hit her like a physical blow. Camilla had dealt with condescension before. As a black woman, she'd learned to navigate spaces where people made assumptions about her intelligence, her capability, her worth. But this was different. This was her baby. Her child's life potentially hanging in the balance, while a man who'd taken an oath to do no harm looked at her like she was an inconvenience. "Please," she said, hating how her voice broke. "I'm not being dramatic. Something is really wrong. I can feel it." Dr. Hartwell closed his tablet with a decisive click. "You're fine. The baby's fine. Go home, rest, drink some water. If it gets worse, come back." He turned toward the door. Camilla stood up too quickly. The room spun and she grabbed the examination table for support. The movement made her gown shift and she saw it again, fresh blood more than before seeping through. "Look," she said desperately. "Please just look. I'm bleeding." Dr. Hartwell turned back and something in his expression shifted, not to concern, to anger. "Don't be dramatic. Women have been giving birth for thousands of years without all this fuss. You need to calm down. I'm not leaving until someone helps my baby." The words came out stronger than Camilla felt. She was terrified, weak, bleeding, but she was also a mother, and mothers fought. Dr. Hartwell's face darkened. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You need to leave. You're disrupting my ER." He pulled her toward the door. When Camilla tried to pull back, tried to make him listen, he did something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He slapped her, hard, across the face. The sound echoed in the small room. Camilla's head snapped to the side, her hand flying to her cheek. For a moment, time seemed to stop. She could see through the open door, nurses frozen at their station, a patient in the hallway with his mouth open, a security camera in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. "Security!" Dr. Hartwell's voice was loud, commanding, the voice of someone used to being obeyed. "Remove this woman from my hospital. Now." Two security guards appeared. They looked uncomfortable, uncertain, but they followed orders. They always followed orders. Camilla didn't fight as they escorted her out. She was crying too hard to speak, one hand on her burning cheek, the other cradled protectively over her belly. Outside, the night air was cold. The parking lot was nearly empty. She made it 3 steps before her legs gave out. She never saw the woman who caught her. Dr. Helen Okonkwo had been walking to her car after a brutal 16-hour shift. She was exhausted, running on caffeine and willpower, but when she saw a pregnant woman collapse in the parking lot, instinct took over. Helen was on her knees in seconds, fingers finding Camilla's pulse, eyes scanning for injury. One look at the blood soaking through Camilla's dress told her everything she needed to know. "Call 911, Helen shouted to a nearby orderly. "Tell them possible placental abruption, patient is 7 months pregnant, we need an ambulance now." The ride to County Hospital was a blur of sirens and pain. Helen held Camilla's hand the entire way, speaking in a calm, steady voice that cut through the panic. "Stay with me. You're going to be okay. Your baby is going to be okay. I'm not leaving you." At County, they moved fast. The staff there didn't care about insurance cards or designer handbags. They cared about saving lives. Camilla was rushed into surgery, and Helen, who was supposed to be going home to sleep, stayed. The surgery took 6 hours. It was touch and go more than once. The baby, a tiny girl, was delivered by emergency C-section, her cries weak but present. Camilla hemorrhaged on the table, and Helen donated blood when they ran short of her type. When it was over, when both mother and daughter were stable, Helen sat in the waiting room with Camilla's husband, Dennis, who'd arrived halfway through with terror in his eyes. He couldn't speak. He just held Helen's hand and cried. 3 days later, when Camilla was finally strong enough to have visitors, she asked Helen why. Why had she stayed? Why had she risked her career by filing an incident report against one of the most powerful doctors in the city? Why had she given her own blood, spent her day off sitting in a waiting room, held the hand of a stranger? Helen's answer was simple. Because I became a doctor to save lives. All lives. Not just the ones who can afford it. She smiled tiredly. Besides, I saw the security footage. That man needed to be stopped before he hurt someone else. Dennis wanted to sue. He wanted to burn St. Augustine to the ground. wanted to make everyone who'd ignored his wife pay, but lawyers cost money they didn't have. Medical bills were piling up despite Medicaid. They had a newborn in the NICU. The idea of taking on a hospital, a powerful doctor, the whole system, it felt impossible. 1 week after the birth, Camilla was home. The baby, whom they'd named Grace, was still in the hospital but doing better each day. Camilla was sitting in the nursery they'd prepared, holding a tiny onesie when she heard cars outside. Multiple cars. She looked out the window and felt her heart stop. 3 black SUVs had parked in front of their modest apartment building. Men in suits emerged first, surveying the area like Secret Service agents. Then, from the middle vehicle, stepped a man Camilla recognized from photographs she'd spent years avoiding. Lawrence Benedict Montgomery III, her father. She hadn't seen him in person since her mother's funeral 2 years ago, and even then she'd refused to speak to him. He'd sent letters, made calls, had his lawyers reach out with offers of support, money, connection. Camilla had rejected everything. Her mother had raised her alone, had worked double shifts as a nurse, had given Camilla everything she had while the man who got her pregnant went back to his mansion and his society wife. Money couldn't fix that. Money couldn't buy back 28 years of absence. But he was here now, standing on her doorstep, and when Dennis opened the door, Lawrence Montgomery looked like a man who'd aged a decade in a week. "Please," he said, and his voice cracked. "Please let me see her. Let me see the baby." Camilla wanted to say no, wanted to close the door in his face like she'd closed the door on his letters, his calls, his too late attempts at being a father. But something in his face stopped her. He looked broken. She let him in. Lawrence Benedict Montgomery III was a man who owned 47 hospitals across the country. He had buildings named after him, had been on the cover of Forbes, had more money than some small nations. But when he looked at baby Grace through the clear bassinet, sleeping peacefully, his hands trembled. "She has her grandmother's eyes," he whispered. "Your mother's eyes." Camilla felt tears sliding down her face. "Why are you here?" Lawrence pulled out a tablet. His hands were shaking as he pulled up a video file. "Because I need you to see something, because I need you to know that I saw what happened to you." The security footage from St. Augustine played on the screen. Camilla watched herself wait for hours, watched nurses ignore her, watched Dr. Kenneth Hartwell dismiss her, grab her, and then she flinched as she watched him slap her, watched herself be escorted out like a criminal. The video ended, but Lawrence was already pulling up another file, and another, incident reports, patient complaints, a pattern of behavior spanning years, all buried, all ignored, because Dr. Hartwell was brilliant and brought prestige to the hospital. "I have an assistant who keeps track of my family," Lawrence said quietly. "At a distance, respecting your wishes, but when you checked into St. Augustine, I was notified. It's my hospital, Camilla. I own it, and I watched them treat you like you were nothing." His voice broke. "I watched a man put his hands on my daughter, on my pregnant daughter, and throw her out to possibly die in a parking lot." "So what?" Camilla's voice was hard. "You're here to throw money at it? Make it go away? That's what you do, isn't it? That's what you tried to do with my mother." "No." Lawrence looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm here to tell you that I burned it all down." The board meeting had happened the day before. Lawrence Montgomery had walked into St. Augustine Medical Center and demanded the presence of every senior staff member. He'd played the security footage, all of it. Not just Camilla's case, but 6 other cases his investigators had found in the past month alone. Patients ignored, patients dismissed. A pattern of discrimination so clear that even the most expensive lawyers couldn't explain it away. Dr. Kenneth Hartwell was fired immediately. His medical license was suspended pending a full investigation by the state medical board. 3 nurses who'd ignored Camilla were terminated. The hospital administrator, who'd buried complaints for years, was forced to resign. But Lawrence hadn't stopped there. He'd established a $50 million fund in Camilla's name. The Camilla Reynolds Patient Advocacy Fund would investigate care disparities in all his hospitals, implement mandatory bias training, and provide legal support for patients who'd been mistreated. Dr. Helen Okonkwo, the young resident who'd saved Camilla's life, was offered a full-ride fellowship and a future position as chief of emergency medicine. "And this," Lawrence said, pulling out a check, "is for you. $10 million for everything I should have given you, for everything I failed to be." Camilla looked at the check. $10 million. It would solve every problem she had, pay off medical bills, buy a house, ensure Grace never wanted for anything. She could quit her job, go back to school, live the life she'd never dared dream of. All she had to do was take it. She tore it up. Lawrence stared at the pieces of paper fluttering to the floor. "Camilla, I'll let you know your granddaughter," Camilla said. Her voice was steady now, strong. "I'll let you be in our lives. But not because you paid your way in, and not without conditions. Anything. That $10 million, you donate it to County Hospital, the place that actually saved my life, the place where doctors care about patients, not insurance cards." She stood up, crossing her arms. "And you volunteer, 1 day a month, at a free clinic, not writing checks, actually showing up, actually seeing how most people live, how they struggle, how they're treated by a system you profit from." Lawrence Montgomery was a man used to negotiating, used to boardrooms and power plays and getting what he wanted. But looking at his daughter, at this woman who'd been raised to be strong without him, who'd almost died because of a system he'd helped create, he realized he had nothing to negotiate with. She wasn't asking, she was telling him the price of redemption. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." Dr. Kenneth Hartwell's fall was spectacular. The medical board revoked his license permanently. The footage of him slapping a pregnant patient went viral, though Camilla's face was blurred to protect her identity. He became a cautionary tale, a symbol of everything wrong with healthcare, of privilege unchecked and power abused. His wife left him. His country club revoked his membership. He was last seen working as a consultant for a medical malpractice insurance company, helping them avoid paying out claims. The irony was lost on no one, but the real story wasn't about his downfall. 6 months later, Camilla stood in the newly renovated pediatric wing of County Hospital. Baby Grace was on her hip, healthy and perfect, grabbing at her mother's hair. Lawrence stood beside them, wearing not a designer suit but simple clothes, having just finished his monthly volunteer shift at the free clinic. He looked tired. He looked humbled. He looked, for the first time Camilla could remember, like someone who understood what it meant to serve rather than be served. The plaque on the wall read, "The Camilla Reynolds Patient Advocacy Center, because every life matters." Helen Okonkwo stood beside them, now officially the youngest chief of emergency medicine in the hospital network's history. She squeezed Camilla's hand. "You changed everything," she said softly. Camilla looked at her daughter, at this tiny person who'd almost never taken a breath, who existed because one person had cared enough to stop. "No," she said. "We just reminded everyone what should have always been true." Dr. Kenneth Hartwell lost everything, his career, reputation, and medical license. But the real story isn't about his downfall. It's about Camilla, who taught a billionaire that money can't buy integrity, and that sometimes the richest thing you can offer someone is the chance to earn redemption. Respect costs nothing, but the absence of it can cost everything.